One thing I wanted to mention, don't forget we have these up front. Unless one of you grabbed one, these are free. And so just a little devotionals and take it with you. You can keep them in your car. You can keep them at work. One thing I found where I am, because of all the trains, you're constantly getting caught in a train. So you can just have one sitting there and you can read one while you're waiting on a train. But like I said, what I was originally going to speak on, I'll probably do the series maybe starting next week. But just was led kind of to do something different. We've covered this before when we've gone through it, so it's to be a review. But just thinking back through what we did on Wednesday and just some of the things that we're facing. So last night I was kind of reminded, I was flipping channels. Gene and the kids were gone, and so I was kind of looking at some stuff. And Hacksaw Ridge was on. Some of you might have seen it, dealing with Private Doss. And if you remember in the movie, they wanted to call him a coward and just all their other things, and how they totally misunderstood him. And obviously, before it was over with, they recognized that he was anything but a coward and actually saved the lives of many, many, many people. And even got some awards later. Another one was Coach Carter. Some of you might remember Coach Carter, in which the coach goes back to where his alma mater and Richmond High School, and where most of them never went to college. And he basically changes the atmosphere. And he wants to recognize that you want to get out of here and you want to get on to a college education, change the perspective of the team. And actually 5 of them ended up with scholarships. 6 of them on the team actually went on to college, which was remarkable for that particular school. So think about it, just how many things can change, but it has to do a lot with what we're going through. So stop and think about it. Today we're going to look at a man who is a man of faith, but he also is a man of the world. He went back and forth. So think about that. Samson had a battle with himself over the dot and the line, didn't he? One minute he's doing what he should, another minute he's not. He also had a battle over his personal desires, over the people that he served. He had that inner battle for supremacy. Who's going to rule, like Paul talks about in Romans 6 to Romans 8. So why don't you think about that in Romans 6 to Romans 8, but then you add on, who rules our life today? Who's running our life? And who or what is my stumbling block? We all have different stumbling blocks, but recognize that stumbling block can come back at any time. You may have conquered it today, but if you're not careful, it'll be back tomorrow. Why don't you think about it? Because I think so often we think about only the negative things about Samson. He did some good things too. And I also want you to think about it, because in Hebrews 11, let me just read this to you. What more shall I say? For time will fail me if I tell you of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, and Samuel, and the prophets. You realize Samson's in the Hall of Fame. Most of us never think of Samson in the Hall of Fame. So there's things we can learn that he did that was good. And I think it's important also. And then it goes on there, talks about conquering, weakness made perfect, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. And Samson did that. So there's things that we can learn that he did that was good. There's things that we can learn that he did that were not good. We can learn from it. So let's turn to it. First of all, we've got 5 things. In Judges chapter 13, it's 13 through 16. And you have a proper upbringing. You remember we saw last time, we talked about Joseph, and he had some things that were not necessarily the best of upbringing. And you looked at Samson, and he had a great upbringing. You see the problem you have in verse 1. It says, the sons of Israel, this is Judges 13:1, the sons of Israel, again, did evil in the sight of the Lord, so the Lord gave them into the hands of the Philistines 40 years. So they're in the Philistines 40 years, which remember the Philistines, they were made up of 5 city-states right along the Mediterranean. And so they had 5 city-states, basically. City-state just being a city and the surrounding, and each had their own little lord that took care of it. And so they had it for 40 years. Now notice then what you have is his parents in verse 2 to 7. There's a certain man of Zorah, a family of Danites, whose name was Noah, and his wife was barren and had not borne any children. So notice we never know his mother's name. We know if they're a Danite. And notice then the angel appears to her and says, you're barren, but you're going to have a child, and you're going to have a son. Then goes on and says in verse 4 down to in verse 5, he is going to be a Nazarite from birth. Normally, a Nazarite was just a vow that you took, but he was going to be from birth. And in fact, it was supposed to start right now, and she was supposed to take the Nazarite vow during her pregnancy. So nothing, even when he was in the womb, he was not even going to touch anything so far as that goes. But notice at the end of verse 5, God, he shall begin to deliver Israel from the Philistines. He begins to deliver them. Who ended up completing the task? 1 Samuel 7, Samuel comes along and helps to deliver, and then obviously Saul and David. So Samuel, you realize, the great man of God, was also a contemporary, at least part of the time, with Samson. Most of us never think about that. So stop and you think about that. So here, this is his plan. So I want you to think about it. The angel comes to you. It says the angel, so obviously you have pre-incarnate. So here he comes and he talks to her, and says this is going to happen. Now, how do you think it's going to feel now when the woman comes to the husband? It says, an angel of the Lord came to me and we're going to have a son. What would your response be? And I think it's interesting. Notice what the husband then says. Manoah entreated the Lord, saying, O Lord, please let the man of God whom thou hast sent come to us again, that he may teach us what to do for the boy who is to be born. That's one of the greatest statements. Does he question what his wife just heard? God, come back and teach us how to raise the boy. So obviously, well, I've already raised my kids. What about your grandkids? Great-grandkids? How many of you have ever gone to the Lord and said, Lord, how do you want me to help raise them? Notice the second question when the angel does come back in 12. Manoah said, notice he doesn't say if. Now when your word comes to pass, what shall be the boy's mode of life and his vocation? Why would that be important to know? Why do you want to know what the person's mode and his vocation is going to be? He is asking the angel to tell him before the child is even born, before he's even been conceived. Because if you know where he is going to go, can you help then guide him in that direction? How many of you have ever asked, Lord, from the very beginning, child, grandchild, help me to see what his gifts are, and I can help guide him that way? Most of us never think of that. So here you have some great parents. I mean, the mother and father both are in on the plan, and both want to do what's right, and both asking God what to do. And that's amazing when you look at it. Unlike some of the things that went on in Joseph's life and so on. So he has great parents. We then know that it comes about, and they then offer the praise, proper response for the answer. And then notice 24. So here you have the proper upbringing. When the woman gave birth to a son and named him Samson, and the child grew up and the Lord blessed him. What's 20 years of your life? Wow, in one verse. You're conceived, you're born, and we don't know exactly when he started. We're just saying 20. And then notice what happens then in verse 25. The Spirit of the Lord began to stir him, so he has the power from above. When you think about the proper upbringing, am I ready for God to ask something of me? Did he ask either the husband or the wife? No. He just came to him and said, this is what is going to happen. And my response is, why me? They didn't ask why me. What can I do to further your plan? And we'll do the best. It's interesting what you have. Will I ask him for understanding and how to get the job done? All right, this is what you want me to do. How do you want me to do it? And that's going to be true for all of us. Whether we stay in the building, go to another one, we need to ask God the same thing. If we stay here, what do we need to do? If we go there, what do we need to do? There's so many things. Are we asking him what to do and what is my part in it? It's amazing. And then, will I rely on the Holy Spirit? You notice he doesn't start doing anything until the Spirit comes upon him. You and I can try a lot of things on our own, and that's exactly what it's going to do. It won't go very far. How well did it go when the Spirit left Samson? How good was it? It wasn't very good. It will be the same way. So notice, first of all, he had a proper upbringing. Notice, starting and then we know the story well, in 14 he has poor vision. Let's look at his vision. Verse 1 to 3, and then you also will have it noticed again in verse 7. Samson went down to Timnah. That was only 4 miles away from where he lived. And he saw a woman, daughter of the Philistines. He goes back to his parents, and he said, I saw the woman. You go to verse 3, get her for me, for she looks good to me. Verse 7, he went down and talked to the woman, and she looked good to him. His whole judgment of who to select for a wife is what? Based upon appearance. And Deuteronomy said right up front, you are never to marry a foreign woman. Is he following what God told him to do? Yeah. But is the Spirit in him? Yes. And you have this battle that's going to take place. Now, obviously, God's going to use it here in the first part. Now, notice, I think, how many of us have poor vision and we get ourselves into things that we shouldn't because we're not seeking in? One thing I would greatly admire when I was in India, when you all sent me there, met a man by the name of Moses. He was in his 20s, early 20s. And I was talking to him, and a very, very incredibly gifted individual. And I was talking to him, and I said, talking about getting married or whatever. And of course, he was very traditional from Indian background. And I said about a wife, he said, whatever my grandparents and parents, whoever they select for me, that's who my wife will be. He had no problem with it, and he was looking forward to what they select. They know what I need, and they know me, and they will do what's best. Now, how well would that work in our culture today? It's amazing. And he had no problems with that. Think about the poor vision. One is he had poor vision, but notice then his vows he messes up too. Verse 4 to 6, when he's going down, we realize he comes across a lion in verse 5. And the young lion, and it says in verse 6, the Spirit comes upon him and he tears the lion apart with his bare hands. Nothing wrong with that. But notice just the power when the Spirit came on him. When he goes back to see her again in verse 8, bees had swarmed, and he had got a swarm. If you know much about bees, my dad used to raise them. When you get too many in a hive, they'll swarm and they'll leave and start a new nest. So he started the nest in there, and he reaches in and he gets some honey. But he doesn't tell his parents, and he gives his parents some honey. Why didn't he tell his parents? Remember, Nazarite vow. And they've been raised him the whole time, and if he's 20, he's never to touch a dead animal. The honey's in the dead animal. If he tastes it, if I give it to my parents and I tell them where it came from, what are they going to do? Lecture time. Notice, is he flirting with the woman he is? Is he flirting with his vows and what the standards that God has for him? How many of us do the same thing? We have standards, but then God, in the Word of God, we flirt with them. Notice also the thing that got him in trouble was the voices he was listening to. Starting in verse 10, we know the custom was to basically have a bachelor party and have 30 companions. And if you remember, then he gives them the riddle. And after 3 days, they can't figure out the riddle. And what they each have to give him one set of garments. Now, how hard would it be for them, each one, to come up with one set of garments? Now, if they get it, he has to come up with 30. It's a whole lot harder. So notice then we're going to go broke. We're going to go to the poorhouse if we have to come up with one set of garments. So obviously that wouldn't be true. But they come to his wife-to-be and during basically this week-long ceremony and say, either you find out what it is or we're going to burn you and your dad. We're going to kill you. So she starts nagging him. And she nags him now for 4 days. And on the 7th day, he gives in, and he tells her. Then what happens if you go down then into verse 17 and then 18, they then answer him and say basically what the riddle means. Now what does he have to do? Remember, I'll give 30 deals of garments. Does he have 30 garments to give each one of those men? Nope. Okay, so the seventh day, that would be, if you look at how they did things then, that would be when the marriage would be consummated and when it would be over. He's mad, he has to get the 30 garments. If you look at what happens now, in verse 19, most of us don't think about it, but notice he goes, the Spirit comes upon him, and he goes, Ashkelon. Where's Ashkelon at? Ashkelon would be basically if you go from here to my house. It's 23 miles away. Another city of the Philistines. All right, I need to get 30 garments. He walks 23 miles to that Philistine city. He kills 30 of them. He strips them of their clothes. He walks 23 miles back and says, here's your clothes. Yeah. And then to cool off, he goes and leaves. And while he leaves, then the dad thinks, well, he doesn't love my daughter. It's the seventh day. It's time to consummate the marriage. I'm going to give him to the companion. So you stop and think about it. God was stirring him up, right? To go against the Philistine. So you think about it. You have this deal here. What am I looking at? Was he looking at the wrong thing? What did Job say in Job? You stop and think, I have made a covenant with my eyes, therefore how can I gaze at a virgin? You have the same thing with you look at Joseph and you look at David. They each took 4 steps. David took the wrong 4 steps. Joseph took the right 4 steps. Each one of them has choices to make. And notice then he made the wrong choices and there were consequences. Now God intervened in this particular case. But stop and think. You know, when you get a shipwreck, when it happens, what causes a ship to wreck? Is it because it gets off course? What causes us to shipwreck when we get off course? Those of you know much about lighthouses, we obviously don't use them today because of all the technology that we have. But if you had, in ancient days, ancient in our history, 100 years ago, if you were going to some of the sea coasts along our eastern seaboard, you had to go into channels. And let's say you had to come down a channel to port, and you had a lot of rocks on this side, and a lot of rocks on this side, and you had a channel. How did you get in it? How did they set up the lighthouse to get there? Do you know how they did it? They set up 2 lighthouses. One was down low, and one was up high. If you have 2 of them here, Grady, do those 2 line up? No. Do those line up, Bob? Only time they line up is when? When you're in the channel. How many of us is our life lined up with the Word of God? If our life is lined up with the Word of God, we're going to come down the channel. If it's not, we're going to wreck on the rocks. And what happens to Samson? God spared him here and used it. He's going to use it some more. So notice then, you had poor vision, like we said. We also had the proper upbringing. If you notice the next thing, you have the what I call the profitable ministry. Starting in 15, notice in verse 1. It was at the harvest time, so they go out, and remember, companion became the husband, and he goes back to see his wife, which you stop and think about it, how many months later would this have been? And he comes back and he finds out it's at the wheat time, wheat harvest, which has been in May in that part of the country or world. He comes back and he finds out that he gave him to his best friend. So he says, well, here's my younger daughter, you can have her. Well, that's not what Samson wants, so he said, all right, you did me wrong. So he grabs 300 foxes, which obviously the Lord had allowed him, brought them together where he could get them. He ties their tails together. So there'd be 150 pairs, and you light each one of the tails. What's going to happen? They're going to get frantic, and they're going to take off, and what's going to happen? When the wheat is all up in grain like that, and they run into all the fields trying to get away from the fire that's on their tail on fire, what's going to happen? All the fields get on fire. So what's going to happen to their harvest? It's gone. So notice then, they then ask the Philistines, who did this? In verse 6, they said, Samson, the son-in-law of the Timite, because he took his wife and gave her to his companion. So the Philistines come up and burn her and her family with fire. So they're blaming the father for giving the daughter away, and they go in and they kill her. Samson hears this and says, all right, you shouldn't have done that. I'm going to avenge what you did to her. But when I finish, I'll stop. So you notice then in verse, remember what was his purpose was to start to deliver Israel from the Philistines. In verse 8, it said, he struck them ruthlessly with a great slaughter, and he went to live in the cliffs of the rocks of Edom. The word there for ruthless means brute force. With his bare hands, he took them on, and he defeated, we are never told how many. Hundreds and hundreds of people, was torn apart with his bare hands. I'll never forget, years ago, I went to a Scottish Games, and they used to have it here. And they had a person from Australia competing. I mean, you talk about a mammoth of an individual, and the way he grabbed that 55 pounds and we grab and throw it around and do everything, just huge. Well, notice Samson, because of what happens later with Delilah, he doesn't appear to be like a Goliath. Otherwise, they would have recognized the physical strength. They were wanting to figure out how he can be so strong. But just with brute force, notice what he did. That's interesting. So he has the fields, he has what happens to his family, but notice what about his friends? Really, really sad what takes place. Is God using Samson to get rid of the Philistines? Alrighty? So notice Judah. Whose side should Judah be on? Should they be on Samson's side? Or should they be on the Philistine side? Notice what happens then. So he's living off by himself. Verse 10, the men of Judah come up. Why have you come up against us? And they said, we have come up to bind Samson in order to do to him as he did to us. As the Philistines come to them. In verse 11, 3,000 men of Judah go down to take Samson and deliver him over to the Philistines. Now stop and think about it. Who are they opposing? They're opposing Samson, and who gives Samson his power? God does. So if I am opposing Samson, and he's being used to deliver us of the Philistines, who am I actually going against? God. And you think 3,000 is going to do any good against God, if that's what he wants? That's amazing. What Samson says, okay, I won't. If you'll bind me and not promise not to kill me, I'll let you do it. Because notice Samson doesn't want to do what? Kill his countrymen. He cares more of his countrymen than his countrymen do of him. Again, a great example. What do you want? Now, what happens if 3,000 of your men take it over and deliver you to the Philistines? Are you having to trust God? Because when you get over there, what are they going to want to do to you? Remember, God is using him. It's great ministry. Notice then what happens is they bring him over and they give him to, in verse 14, and it says the Spirit comes mightily on him and he just pops the ropes off. Like it's flax, like taking a knife to butter or fire to a rope. He grabs the jawbone of a donkey and he wields it. And how many does he kill? 1,000. I want you to think about that for a minute. You kill 1,000. If I kill one a minute, how long will it take me to kill 1,000? That's how many in an hour? 60. How many in 10 hours? 600. That would take you 16 and a half hours of killing one a minute. Now do you realize he's exhausted when he's done? How many of you ever tried to hold anything, a hoe, a rake, anything for any length of time? What happens to your hands? So notice then here, by the way, why wasn't Judah getting in on this? Why wasn't the rest of Israel getting in on this? It's only Samson. Notice then he's exhausted. And notice he turns to his father and he says, obviously he's thirsty. Would you be thirsty? What's the climate like in Israel? It's hot. I mean, even if you did two a minute, that's only 8.5 hours. You know? So think about it. He asks God then for water, and God miraculously brings forth water. And notice how he names each place for what God's doing for him. But notice verse 20. Most people never read this verse. So he judged Israel how many years? 20. So 20 years he's judging Israel and doing what he should be doing. Most people never see that. All they see is his downfall. They never saw he did what. But notice then a pesky problem. What started the problem? A woman. What's going to do it again? So notice then in verse 16, you have his pesky problem. He starts looking and notice he sees a harlot. He goes through Gaza. And notice then he enters the harlot. And what's amazing in verse 3, they think, all right, they surround the city. Obviously, a city state like that, they'd close the gates. And notice in verse 3, Samson gets up at midnight. And what does he do? He goes to the city gates and the posts. Now, how big would those be? And how heavy would they be? What does Samson do? He doesn't just open them up. He doesn't just break the lock or whatever. He picks them up. The gates and the posts. And where does he bring them? Where? To Hebron. How long and how far away is that? 38 miles. You know, you can't pick them up. You couldn't even get them out of the ground. And you're picking them up and you're putting them on your back. Now, what do you think they woke up the next morning and they see them, and then where are they? And they got to go 38 miles and figure out how to get them back. You think about it. Notice though, but is he flirting with danger? He's flirting with danger. We know the rest of it. Obviously, Delilah then is going to come. And notice again, is it personal for his own gratification, or is it for his people? He's judged them 20 years like he should. But notice then he goes with Delilah. And obviously she cared nothing about it. If you look at it, each one of the lords, which there's 5 of you, remember there's 5 city-states, they each offered her a great sum of money. Find out what is wrong. What gives him his strength? We want to get rid of it. She didn't care about him. She simply was using him to get what she wanted. And we know the story when he finally does tell her, who's the first one in verse 19 that starts to afflict him? She is. She cared nothing about it. She told him, but notice then, she kept nagging him and nagging him. What happened way back 20 years earlier? She kept nagging him to get what it was, the riddle. She keeps nagging him. He tells her, and then obviously they cut his hair. When you think about it, the pesky problem, and I think for all of us to think about it, what problem have I had in my past? All of us have had different ones. It could be, negativity. It could be a lot of different things. What safeguards are we putting in place to keep it from happening? When I'm at the refinery, when things happen, they come up with all kinds of, they do the reports and they do everything they can to make sure it doesn't happen again. How many of us are doing things to make sure it doesn't happen again? When you, any of you ever gone or been known someone that's gone to AAA, what do they tell them? What's one thing? Once an alcoholic, what?
Always an alcoholic.
Always an alcoholic. I think it's important for all of us to recognize in our own life, whatever it might be, the problem, the danger we had better realize that can come back at any time. And we better be ready and have that safeguard. It's amazing, if you have trouble with pornography, then you don't turn on the TV to see the channel. You don't go down the aisle where the magazines are. I wonder if they have the magazine this week. Of course they're going to have it. So we have to have the safeguards. You think about it. The last part is the prayer for redemption. It's interesting when he goes then to pray. You know the story well. They seize him and they gouge out his eyes. They gave him an anesthetic, I'm sure, when they did that. And they cut his hair, obviously. They then bring him and they have this great deal, and his hair grows back. They have a god by the name of Dagon, which was a vegetation god. And basically they're saying Dagon gave him into our hands. And notice then they're sitting there, and they have the way the structure was built. There's two main pillars that hold the structure up. And there's 3,000 on the roof. And all 5 lords of the city-states are there. And they're ridiculing him. His hair's grown back. Notice then, what does he ask for? Does God forgive him? Does he have his greatest victory? You mean we can have our greatest victory even when we fail? Even though he failed, God forgave him, but he had his greatest victory. How many thousands do you think died that day? And the lords are inside of the 5 city-states. So the building falls on top of them. The building has to be strong enough to hold 3,000 people on the roof. So do you think that might have weighed a little bit? What's the chances of any one of those lords surviving? Notice the tremendous that he did. But notice then, he was willing to die to be avenged of his 2 eyes. But think about his great victory that he had. So I want us to think about some applications for today. Our upbringing. Am I ready to be used? Notice his parents. We knew nothing about them until all of a sudden, and we still don't know the mother's name. Will I ask God how to help me, assist me in a job he's not wanting me to do? What about my poor vision? What am I looking at? What am I listening to? Who am I listening to? Am I ready to shipwreck if I don't get it straightened out? What about the profitable ministry? Do I remember Samson only for his mistakes? Or do I remember him also for his victories and many things he did? When I think of other people, I only think of their problems and mistakes. He's in the Hall of Fame. What about the pesky problem? What safeguard am I putting up to guard against that problem coming back? And what about guidance? Our greatest victory may be just around the corner. Am I ready to ask him, and am I ready to pay the price? Did it cost Samson anything? But would you rather be doing basically blind, walking around in a circle, doing a woman's work in that day, and just grinding men and being laughed at the rest of your life? Or would you rather get even with those people and help deliver your people? Choices have to be made. Choices have to be made. Choices have to be made. Choices have to be made.